What we're going to be focusing on in this lesson is we're going to be looking at interest groups and how interest groups impact what happens within the political process in the United States, because there are some major impacts that they have. So what is an interest group? An interest group is an organization of people with similar policy goals who enter the political process to try and achieve a particular policy goal. Interest groups generally focus on one thing, meaning that they're generally referred to as single interest groups. You've got anti-gun groups, you've got anti-war groups, you've got organizations like PETA, which is People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, who go through and they try and use their power and their ability to look at different things to influence what happens within the government. And they do so through various different things. PETA tends to be one of the more extreme organizations who try and use their political power. And there's actually, as a good example of what they look at, we can look at a game that they put on the internet called Pokemon Black and Blue. Alright, Pokemon Black and Blue is an actual video game that they created using Pokemon as a platform to be able to show why the abuse of animals is a negative thing. So you can go through and you can see Pokemon Black and Blue, gotta free them all. You hit play, it comes up. As battling Pokemon grew in popularity, generations of children were growing up believing that Pokemon exist for no other reason than to be used and abused by humans. Children learned about dominance instead of compassion, because Pokemon is what taught them to do that. While Pokemon faced the worst abuses, children also started bullying each other, until one Pokemon decided he'd had enough. You have escaped from your trainer, get ready to fight. And then it goes through, and you can actually fight using things like group hug to be able to lessen defense. Sharon's defense fell. Sharon uses discipline. Okay, so here we've got something that's created by PETA, an interest group who is trying to teach you that abusing animals is wrong by having animals fight back against their owners and demonizing any sort of people who would possibly, own animals ever. So as you can see, we've got a very interesting perspective and a very interesting way in which they are trying to accomplish their goals. Public interest lobbies are organizations that seek a collective good, the achievement of which will not selectively and materially benefit the membership or activists of the organization. So when we look at what interest groups are trying to accomplish, they are trying to accomplish goals that benefit the society as a whole. So political theories. There are three important theories regarding interest groups and how they function. Those theories are pluralism, elitism, and hyperpluralism. Now, I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time talking about these at this point because they are something that we've discussed in previous lessons. So that's something you should be able to go back and kind of look at on your own. But remember, pluralism argues that the interest group activity brings representation to everyone, and that they have the ability to get what they want sometimes, but not always get what they want other times, therefore providing a balanced attack of influence within the government. Elitism argues that it is the rich and educated and powerful are the ones that get to manipulate what happens within the government and get what they want. And then we have hyperpluralists. Hyperpluralists believe that there are way too many interest groups within the United States, and that they're all getting way too much influence, ballooning the federal budget because organizations or politicians don't want to tell them no, because that would be potentially losing votes. So the Iron Triangle, which we've talked about in class before, when we talked about this, when we talked about bureaucracy. So, what brings the success of interest groups? Interest groups that are smaller tend to have organizational advantages over larger interest groups. Now, normally we would think that larger groups would be better because the voices would be louder and there would be more people in order to be able to fight for things. But that's not necessarily always the case, because the more people that you have, the more viewpoints that you have to be able to accommodate when you're coming up with your plans, the less mobile and the less flexible you're going to be within the implementation of those plans. So a potential group is composed of all people who might be group members because they share some common interest. I'm pretty sure that if I were to ask the class, how many of you guys think that animal abuse is okay, nobody is going to raise their hand. However, if I were to ask you, how many of you would be willing to join PETA in order to be able to try and end animal abuse in this country, the actual number of you that would raise your hand and actually participate in an organization like that would be much, much smaller. Those of you who would be willing to actually participate are what we refer to as the actual group. These are the people from the potential group who actually choose to join. These people are generally more energetic, they are more knowledgeable, and they are much more willing to do what they need to do in order to be able to meet the goals of that group. So what are they fighting for? They're fighting for a collective good. A collective good is something of value that can be withheld, cannot be withheld from either the potential or the actual group members. One problem with this is that you get people that are called free riders, people that are able to get the benefit without having to have put any work into the system to be able to receive that benefit. This happens a lot of times if you have places where people can work there without having to join the union that exists. Say, for example, with the teachers union. The teachers union negotiates the salary benefits for all teachers, regardless of whether they are part of the union or not. So any teacher who receives the benefits from the teachers union would be considered a free rider on the system because they are not paying into the system in order to be able to receive the benefits. In order to overcome the free rider problem, many organizations set up what are referred to as selective benefits, and these are goods that a group can restrict to those who pay their yearly dues. Lobbying is something that takes place within the government and is classified as communication by someone other than a citizen acting on his or her own behalf, directed to a government decision maker with the hope of influencing his or her decision. Lobbyists are trying to talk to congressmen to change policy for groups, for interest groups, for political parties, for things like that. They are an important source of information, and if you ever see it on a test, the answer is supposed to be that the most beneficial thing that a lobbyist can provide to a politician is information. So if you ever see that on a test, that's what the answer is. However, they do provide a great deal of money to these congressmen in order to be able to help them in their re-election campaigns. They help form strategy, they help provide information that are supposed to help them in re-election, and they're supposed to be a source of ideas and innovations. The way that the lobbying process works in the United States is very different than you would think it would be. Most of the time when you think of lobbying, it's the idea that a lobbyist is waiting for the congressman to get a minute of their time. The way that lobbying actually works is that congressmen actually seek out lobbyists in order to be able to try and get campaign donations. So when we look at the types of interest groups that exist within the United States, we have labor groups that fight for workers, we have business groups that fight for the businesses themselves, we have environmental groups that are fighting obviously for the environment, we have groups that are fighting for equality, whether it be for ethnic, racial, gender, any of those types of things. And then we have consumer interest groups that are there to try and protect people within the country who buy things, which is really all of us. Business interest groups are the fastest growing types of interest groups in the United States. When it comes to how some of these things, and kind of going back to the discussion that we talked about unions, there are two different types of ways that unions can exist. One is certain states have union laws that allow for union shops. A union shop exists when it is a requirement that you join the union in order to actually work in that place. The United Auto Workers is a great example of that. Most car companies have it to where you have to join the Auto Workers Union in order to actually be employed in that car factory. Other states have passed what they refer to as right-to-work laws, and these right-to-work laws prevent unions from making membership mandatory in order for employment. Through this, we have what comes up, it's referred to as electioneering. Electioneering is the process of aiding candidates financially and getting group members out to support them. Interest groups are going to be a large part of this. They're going to find the candidates that they think best express the opinions that they possess, and they are going to go out there and try and push people into the adoption or voting for these people. You also have what are referred to as political action committees, and they provide an avenue for the support of policy and specific candidates. And we're not going to talk about a whole bunch about political action committees now, but when we talk about campaign finance in our next unit, political action committees are going to play a huge role within that concept.